That means almost 20 years ago. So there was something called Simon Commission, if you know. That the Simon Commission was created by the British government for a consultation with the colony, that the people of the colony called India. And the Indians didn't accept it because all of them were, that is, John Simon was a British parliamentarian. Almost all of them were Britishers. So Indian National Congress took the stand saying that Simon, go back. And then there was a whole thing, okay, Simon, go back, but what are we going to do it? That's how in 1928, 26, actually, Jawaharlal Nehru's father, Motilal Nehru, when he was elected as the AIC's president, they created the Motilal Nehru Committee for the reforms of how the India should be there. And from that committee report, they developed a resolution called Karachi Resolution in 1931. And you need to read that, 31. And the Karachi Resolution is for the first time, human rights for all was recognized. Women's rights was recognized. Right to work was recognized. Right to labor rights were recognized. And actually, it's a huge paradigm shift. The preamble to the Constitution of India was derived from the Karachi, resolution. So actually, in 1946, December 13th, Jawaharlal Nehru, in the Constituent Assembly, presented the statement, purpose statement, and that was passed. And that is what our Constitution starts with, we the people of India. Why I'm telling this, if you are really learning the public policy, you have to start with the Constitution of India and the history of Constitution of India. And why it says that, we the people decided to constitute for ourselves, right? And that sentence is very important. What is justice? What is equality? What is fraternity? What is sovereignty? The sovereignty of our constitution is derived from the sovereignty of the people. That's called we the people. And then if you say Article 14 to Article 32 is part 3 of the constitution is called the fundamental rights. Why I am telling all these things is, when you now, after the independence, so I talked before the independence story, global called, Anti-Slavery International, and how slavery was stopped. After independence, all advocacy will have to be based on the morality, politics, and the substance of the Constitution of India, the values and the substance of the Constitution of India. This is something which I wanted to first, put forward. If you are talking about policy practices in India, and you have to locate the policy practices, the foundation of the idea of the nation state of India is based on the Constitution of India. And that is why the Supreme Court said constitutions, the basic tenets of the Constitution cannot be changed, even by a parliament. So it's the fundamental grammar of all public policies. If you don't understand the Constitution of India, you don't understand the public policies. And that is the basis. And that's the first thing I would say, that when you really look at advocacy or any change by civil society, it's the Constitution of India. Now, in the history of India, after the, establishment of the Indian Constitution and India became a republic in 1950, and then the elections, etc. Very interesting thing, the Indian Parliament became a very, very important space for discussions. And within the Indian Parliament, there were lots of people who have come also from civil society. So the political society as political parties and the civil society, it was a spectrum. There was a whole buffer space. Many Gandhians, for example, I tell you, the first economic advisor to India, one of the famous economists, called P.J. Thomas. If you may know, P.J. Thomas is the one who signed the Bretton Woods Treaty on behalf of the government of India. He is the one who signed the United Nations Charter on behalf of India. And he's an Oxford professor who started his career in Chennai actually, and who became a very important voice. Now he was brought into the Rajya Sabha. He was not a politician. He was an economic advisor, like what you call, like he was a predecessor of Manmohan Singh times, and he was a practicing economist with a PhD in economics from Oxford, right? And P.J. Thomas became a Rajya Sabha member. Then you really look at, John Mathai, Dr. John Mathai, who was an economist, and again from Oxford, and then he became the head of TISCO, Tata Steel, and he was brought. So what happened is the Nehruvian framework is very interesting. In the Nehruvian framework, they got experts. Mahalan Obes and Dr. K.N. Raj were two people who contributed to the five-year plan. Actually, 5-year plans was what I call it macro policy framework during the Nehruvian age. So that's the point we have to understand. In the in the Nehruvian phase, and definitely it is an eclectic policy framework Jawaharlal Nehru used. Eclectic framework means like our constitution is in many ways eclectic. It's the different constitutional practices and policies, frameworks were taken from different parts of the world. Irish constitution and American constitutions, all of them. And the same way, the macro policy framework during the Nehruvian era was 5-year plan. First 5-year plan, second 5-year plan. And if you know Mahalan Obes, who later on went and created what you call Indian Statistical Institute, an economist, an eminent economist, and K.N. Raj, who also took his, who was a great, he was the youngest vice chancellor of, Delhi University at the age of 40. And then, who went and established the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, who hired, Amartya Sen, Manmohan Singh, Subramanian Chatterjee, Jagadish Bhagwati, all the economists we call Indian economists who influenced the world were teaching in Delhi School of Economics. Why I'm telling all these things is the policy paradigm shifted from Nehruvian era to Indira Gandhi era to, Rajiv Gandhi era to Narasimha Rao era to UP era. And it's very interesting how the policy paradigm shifted. The first policy paradigm shift was expert-driven. Expert-driven means civil, economists played a very important role. Mahalan Obes, K.N. Raj, all of them. And then, you brought in people like Varghese Kurian. It was a cooperative movement. And actually, if you really look at it, Varghese Kurian was not a government staff. He was an activist who came to take care of a cooperative with 12 buffaloes. And because since he learned dairy technology and creamery, to establish a creamery, he went to a place called Anand, right? Anand is also a name. It was not actually Anand. It was in a village. That became the Anand Milk, Union Limited, Amul, right? And this civil society initiative became the what you call, and the Gandhian movements, Vaikund Mehta, for example, created what you call the policy framework cooperative movements in India. The cooperative movements in India emerged in the 1960s. Today, actually, if you look at in every village, there is a cooperative bank, a cooperative society. Then you have NABARD. Then you have so many, and then you have Amul. Then you have different state milk marketing. Now, this initiative came from civil society. It's not only Vaikund Mehta, and these people never became ministers. They were all cooperative activists. And that created, I'm saying that the second part, and this got real support from Lal Bahadur Shastri and later on Indira Gandhi. For example, the White Revolution, which made, India was one of the poorest. Now, let me tell you what are the factors which drive to this. In 1960s, India was one of the poorest country with a lot of famine. So what you call PL 84, it's a legislation's name, PL 84, in the US Senate, and through which we were all dependent on the milk powder we got from Denmark, Netherlands and New Zealand, and the whole, the wheat and all other things we got from USA. It is in this context the cooperative movement decided to create, and now within 10 years, India became the largest producer of milk in the world. Can you believe it? It just transformed how civil society initiative. Cooperative movement was a civil society initiative. And how, Subramaniam, who was a minister of agriculture, got a young man from Chennai, who was originally from Kerala, called Swaminathan, as expert, and that created what you call the green revolution, right? And that is what created food sufficiency in India. So you don't need to really come from. So some of these ideas come from experts, some of them come from civil society. Why I'm telling you all this history, unless you understand history, you will not understand anything in public policy practices in India. Then you have, Indira Gandhi coming. So Indira Gandhi also continued this, what you call interesting thing about getting experts and civil society. So P.N. Askar was an advisor, who is again a brain trust. But he brought Manmohan Singh in 1971 when he was working with the United Nations, after being a professor. But then you know the history, right? How Manmohan Singh, became the India's economic Secretary of Economic Affairs, then Reserve Bank. The rest you know the history. So, but experts again. But let me tell you how MGK Menon and other people, experts and activists, made a big difference to the public policy in India. In the 1970s, Sundarlal Behuguna, if you know the Silent Valley movement in India, there were lots of civil society movements. I come from that, as a young, activist, was a big discourse. And this is where Indira Gandhi went to the Stockholm Convention on Environment, the UN Convention on Environment. She was one of the very few heads of the state went. And she proposed United Nations economic program called UNEP. And she proposed that should not be in Europe. And that's why there are only two, UN Habitat and UNEP, with headquarters in Nairobi. All other UN organizations are either in Geneva or in New York. Indira Gandhi said it should be Global South. And if you really look at all the legislations from 1974 onwards, it was all from civil society, right? If you really look at what you call protection of environment, what you call national park, protection of wildlife. So, for example, the Silent Valley campaign, so which I started as a young, student activist, in the 1970s is what you created the national park. Silent Valley was declared as a national park by the Indira Gandhi. There is an organization called Bombay, Natural History, Society. So, and they together, it's a civil society organization with the activists across the world, across India, created the environmental legislations and policies in India. Along with that, there was an advocate called MC Mehta who kept on filing public interest litigation in the 1980s. That's what which created, if you really look at it, the whole legislative framework for environment in India. From the national forest, national parks, protection of wild animals, and in 1981, three young people got together in a small room in Delhi, and they got what you call Citizens Report on Environment. This young fellow, who must be, who was 24 at that time, fresh from IIT Kanpur, his name was Anil Agarwal. And they call it Center for Science and Environment. He got Padma Bhushan and he died. He was a very close friend of mine. See, these young people, three young people, created a whole movement. And this is why I'm saying that, and Indira Gandhi got MGK Menon as a minister. And the one who supported them at that point, his name was K.R. Narayanan. So, K.R. Narayanan was a great supporter of Center for Science and Environment and Anil Agarwal. And then K.R. Narayanan was appointed, if you know, in Rajiv Gandhi ministry as a Minister of Science and Technology. Right? And then, all these things happen. So, if you really look at it, how the change happened from Sundarlal Behuna to Silent Valley to Center for Science and Environment, how this change happened. Right? Can you see me? Yeah. So how this change happened. And then it is those times. So my first public advocacy experience come from the Silent Valley campaign. And that's one of the reasons that, I started reading about, CSE, Center for Science and Environment report called Citizens Report in 1983, I think, for the first time. And slowly the MC Mehta, if you look at it, in 1980s, when V.R. Krishnaiah and P.N. Bhagavati was the Chief Justice, there was something called public interest litigation and jurisprudence, public policy jurisprudence. And two or three people, one is Arun Puri's father, Mr. Puri, who created what you call a consumer organization. Consumer movement was very important at that point in time. And then you have what you call public interest litigation. So almost all the consumer laws has come out of the public interest litigations. MC Mehta was an environmental advocate. At that time, he's the precursor to all the environment. Now there is a whole environmental legislation, if you know, land acquisitions, green tribunal, so much. The jurisprudence started in 1986 by MC Mehta. Why I'm telling all these things? How the policy practices and policy formulations were influenced. It is through legislative framework with parliamentary lobbying. It is through mass mobilization. It is through the public interest litigation by creating a new, what I call policy jurisprudence. So multiple stuff has happened. Now, when I became full-time activist from 1980s, 80s, and then 1991, 92, when Justice Bhagavati and others wanted to create National Center for Advocacy Studies to study public policy and how it gets implemented. At the age of 27 or 28, I was appointed as the CEO, from 300 people actually. I was the youngest guy. Somehow they took me. And that's how I began to do research and studies on this. That's why I don't even a notebook to say these things, because it's by heart for me. So then, for the first time, I called a meeting in 1994 on freedom of information. And this was created by, now not many people know this history. Even, Aruna Roy's book doesn't say this. In my new book will come. So there was a professor called Satyaranjan Sate, SP Sate. He was a professor of Ubendra Bakshi and all of them. Great jurist, great, professor of law. So he told me, John, there is something called freedom of information. We should work on this. When I met him. I said, sir, how do you do it? Then I started doing research on this about the American Freedom of Information Act. At that time there was no, believe me, there was no internet. So I had to go to different libraries. I went to the Parliament Central Library, Nehru Library, all of them to find these books. And then I found the first right to information campaign started in 1978 by the Editors Guild of India. That I call freedom of information. And they may call one, they made a draft bills and other thing. But after the Morarji Desai government fell, it just disappeared. The second right to information or freedom of information was created by CERC Ahmedabad in 1989. And the third one was definitely, I was the one who called the meeting, National Center for Advocacy Studies. So there was the former Home Minister of India called Madhav Godbole and SP Sathe. And then we created, because they were experts, right? One was a very senior IAS officer, one was a jurist. And that's how we created a right to information thing. So we call Anna Hasare, all those people, discussions. I called Aruna Roy, she couldn't come. But it's a NCAS interns who started working with MKSS and all these people. And then in 1996 and 97, National Campaign for Right to Information was established. And background research was done by NCAS, our interns. Many of them are in, big positions. Some of them, he knows Subharat, and others, who came much later. We were talking on the financing of all those stuff. Why I told that the right to information movement has a whole history, and actually it became an act of parliament only in 2005. It got act into Right to Information Act in 2006. What's the story here? Story is when you do policy practices, when you imagine policies, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't. So there's a whole history of these discourses. We started in 1978, and then people who studied it, and then if you ask me, are you the one who made the right to information? No, I was just another another enabler. So it is like the stream. As I said, the Anti-Slavery International, bonded labor prohibition in India. It's not just one person, but somehow in Indian context, like we say, Rajaram Mohan Roy stopped the Sadi. It's not Rajaram Mohan Roy. He was an articulate person. Aruna Roy was responsible for right to information. No, Aruna Roy was one of the articulate, proponents of it. It was created by a whole movement over a period of time. It was an orchestration. I remember going to meet Sonia Gandhi in 2001, 2002, because at that time it was not very difficult to meet them. And she was saying that we will make it. Same way, the right to work, what you call Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, that also came from the civil society. Why? It started in Maharashtra in 1972, called EGS, Employment Guarantee Scheme. And at that time, what is the whole issue? There was a drought in Marathwada, a part of Maharashtra, and many people were dying. And then they didn't have a job. So the minister consulted with others. They said, why don't you give employment for public work? You can make, the old Keynesian framework, if you ask me. So, but then where will the money will come? And that's how in Maharashtra, there is something called professional tax was implemented. You have to understand how the cess, professional tax, etc. came, because it all requires money. And then based on that, people kept on telling that we need right to, work at the national level. So there would be called Indira Rosgar Yojana, if you know. And then there was a huge hue and cry in the 1990s. I was a part of the number of those things called, and that is how Manmohan Singh, I met Manmohan Singh if you remember 1994 in Delhi when he was, imagine those days it was not very difficult to meet these people. The finance minister, he said there is no money to make an act. And that's how, but still we were all pushing. There were lots of IAS officers like Shankaran. Later on, I still remember Uganda. Now he's known as Satyan Nadella's father, but he was a great, these are all my mentors. It is Uganda sir who got as the entry, and he was pushing from inside. He was the principal secretary to Narasimha Rao, a great civil servant, true civil servants who was actually from Andhra. And that's how they pushed. You have national, employment guarantee scheme was created in 1995. There was a call for an act, but they said there is not enough money, right? So, and then in 2005, it became a reality. Though, many people are skeptic, Sonia Gandhi pushed it. There was something called, now again you have to understand, there was a National Advisory Committee, which was all the civil society members, Aruna Roy, NC Saxena, and, many others, right? Ron Grease. And it is the K. Raju was the secretary of the committee, who is from a Dalit background actually. He is from Andhra. That National Advisory Committee, what I call piloted the Right to Information Act in India, 2005, the Right to Work Act, that is, it became Mahatma Gandhi NREGA later, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And then the third one was the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, 2005. These three things were actually piloted by civil society. It was actually the demand come from civil society. Why I'm telling is I was a part of all three campaigns. And the fourth campaign was Right to Education campaign. And if I remember, it was CACL, Campaign Against Child Labor, and CRI's name was Child Relief I Knew. It became Child Rights I Knew at NCAS. When I was doing a workshop, I said, why don't you do rights? Because it's a rights-based advocacy. Rights-based advocacy is based on the constitutional guarantee of we the people, right? We have our rights needs to be protected. Right to livelihood is right to life is Article 21 of the Constitution. And actually in a beautiful judgment, V.R. Krishna Iyer said, right to live means right to livelihood as well, right? And that became the constitutional morale for the right to work. And when they said right to live with dignity requires right to education, that's why Article 21A, right? We also said we wanted to have Article 21B, right to health, right? Because also live to by dignity. And this became an act in 2009. So I'm just, summing up. But if you look at the history of legislation, there are more. If you look at Nirbhaya Act, it came because of the entire civil society got together. The trigger was a rape in Delhi. Rape of a young girl by, the bus conductor and cleaner, etc. And she was killed. And it outraged the citizens and, young people. If there was candlelight vigil everywhere. And that is why in 2013, Nirbhaya Act against rape was done. So that's, if the demand didn't come from the society and the media and the discussion, that act would not happen. And the same way, you have POSH. You know what is POSH? Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace. Vishaga judgment being POSH because that was also demand. If you have a sexual harassment at workplace, and they asked me a POSH committee in every university, in every places, it became that. I'm summing up saying that the advocacy, the history of advocacy by civil society is 200 years in India. So the pre-independence movement was created by experts, civil society, etc. The post-independence movement, macro policy framework during the Nehruvian era was the five-year plan, and then during the Indira Gandhi era was primarily the white revolution, green revolution, and environmental legislations. It all came from the civil society. And in 1980s, the public interest litigation has influenced the policy practices. In the 1990s, the civil society, active civil society movements made a major contribution on right to information. The mRNA, NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, the Right to Food Act, Nirbhaya Act, POSH Act, all these things during the UPA time, civil society played a very important role. But 2014, the frameworks, changed because civil society was delegitimized, right? The space of civil society became less. But despite that, the farmers' struggle is a very important point. A huge farmers' struggle happened. And there was huge mobilization happened against the repealation of Land Acquisition Act. You remember. So there was, and even this government didn't dare to change Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Act. 80,000 rupee, 80,000 crore are being spent on that. And if 2008, the economic slowdown of Europe didn't affect in India because of the NREGA, National Rural Livelihood Program, NRHM, the investment in rural India, because neoliberal framework marginalized the rural India. It was called as social protection, but later on it was became what I call economic investment in the rural market, which created what I call domestic demand in India, which supported our economy. I will stop here. Um, you know, if there is any question. So I was basically talking about how do we influence public policies. And another very important thing I didn't tell you. The problem in India is not to create a legislation or a policy. The problem in India is how do you implement those? And when we started going to the government in the 1990s, the minister said, Mr. John, Mr. Mistry, Mr. So and so, there is no money. Show us the money. And, we didn't know any of those things. I remember, there is ashram school for Adivasis. And ashram schools were not working. And then there is no money for ashram schools. Sorry, we can't do anything, right? This is what the district collector said. Then we went and looked at the budget. There is money, but the money was not spent. And then we realized there was a check for 10 lakhs in the drawer of that, deputy collector. He was not spending it. He said, why should I spend money on the Adivasis? So there was a systemic, what you call resistance to implement the project for Adivasis and others. And that's how we, none of us were economists actually. None of us were trained in public finance. Dave, etc. would know. That's how we started studying budget. I still remember Mr. M.D. Mistry and I spent a whole lot of time. That time there was nothing online. We had to take this whole books which looked Greek to us because, if you have, I don't know whether you have public finance paper, major head, minor head, sub minor head, we learned it hard way. But once we learned, we got the trick. As we said, it is like reading a novel because we know where the money is. We know where exactly the money goes. And that's how we all got into implementation. Systemic implementation lack was, they will make an act, but they will not give money. So you can have a human rights commission, fine. Commissioners, if there is no money, human rights commission doesn't work. And that's how we created People's Bias, and which became Center for Budget and Governance Accountability. All these organizations, human rights activists, Center for CBG, all of them lost FCRA, right? So in a sense, in a way, they were made defunct. And this was just part of the strategy, because unless people really raise where is our money, why we are talking about money? Because money is our money. You are paying every day. From the day you get up and use toilet, you are paying tax. When you sleep, when the electricity is there, you are paying tax. When you use water, you are paying tax. When you have a toothbrush, you are paying tax. You have a paste, you are paying tax. When you have rice eating, you are paying tax. We are paying tax 24 hours, 365 days. It's our money, everything, and poor pay more tax than the rich. Because if I earn 1,000 rupees, I spend almost 200 to 300 rupees is gone to the state exchequer's tax. GST, value added tax, you look at anything. And it is our money, and we have every right to know how the money is being spent. And that's why called accountability, financial accountability. So why I'm saying that when you talk about public policies, it's one thing to formulate a public policy and influence a public policy. It's an entirely different thing to implement it. And these require demand side work and supply side work. Demand side work is the mobilization. For example, in 1961 in India, there was a legislation created called Prevention of Dowry Prohibition Act, which was amended again there. I was just looking in Kerala. In Kerala, still you have dowry death, right? Still you have dowry death. So the point about when you talk about public policy practices in India is, there is an Atrocities Act, 1989, but Dalits are still harassed. So that's the point you need to look at it. When you say public policy influence is one thing, but public policy implementation is totally another thing. So that requires societal change. For example, for gender equality, it's a long struggle. 30 years or 40 years of struggle, still we have not achieved gender equality. Right? We have so many legislations. We have SDG number 5 on gender equality. It doesn't work. So I just wanted to tell that when you say public policy practices, it is influence, but also it is societal change. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, John. I'll come at the end. Just to add, we organize this series along with our sister department, the School of Arts and Science, and I see the director, Professor Christiana Singh here. Thanks, Christiana, for joining us. And I always say that this is more of a session of listening and practicing patience, which is very much missing in today's academia. So thanks, John, for the wonderful discussion. I open the floor for question answer. Be precise and focused when you placing the question, so that John can have some time to answer them. We'll take all the questions one by one, and then probably John can address them. And after that, I'll propose a formal vote of thanks and conclude the session. The floor is open for question and answer. You are on mute, Professor Singh.
I was just watching. I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I was, just to make a comment on this, was very interesting listening to John Samuel, because as a person from higher education, I was just thinking there's a lot of interdisciplinary, insights that we've gained from his talk, right from you talk about environmental matters to social issues to everything in policy making, and a lot of practical application, civic engagement. So if at all, higher education has to make sense. I think irrespective of which discipline we come from, we have to engage in, be aware of what is happening in the world and respond to it. Activism. I mean, all our educational institutions should, would have served their purpose if faculty and students first become activists. I think this is my comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Christiana. Anyone else wants to add a comment or a question from the floor?
Hi, sir. This is Balamurugan from VSCP. Thank you for the insight, sir. We got to know about the role of civil society movements in public policy making. So I work. My work revolves around environmental economics, and when we study the environmental ideologies and movements, the Silent Valley movement, Chipko movement, and the names of Anil Agarwal and Ramchandra Guha are unavoidable. So, since you have been an activist on Silent Valley movement, I would like to know the role of NGOs, especially this Kerala Sastra Sadhya Parishad in Silent Valley movement. Could you share your observations on the thing, sir?
Anyone?
Silent Valley movement was created.
John, can you take all
Okay.
the questions?
Okay.
If at
Yeah.
all there are
There
any
was,
more.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, fine. John, please, over to you.
See, Silent Valley movement, nobody knew about Silent Valley movement. Somebody from the Kerala Forestry Institute um, uh, met M.K. Prasad, who was professor of zoology in Calicut University. And they had a discussion, and he said this is a virgin forest, and there are many species there, and all of them will be destroyed because the government was proposing a hydroelectric project there. So when the government proposed the hydroelectric project, a forestry official who was working with Kerala Forest Research Institute, because others would not know, and he met. So he started writing letters. Everybody opposed him because they said they are against the development, they are against the electric sufficiency. At that time, including the CPM, trade union, CITU, everybody opposed. But M.K. Prasad kept on writing. At that time, there was nothing. I have documented this. He was writing on the postcard to everybody, including Indira Gandhi and everything. He will buy a postcard, 1,000 postcard, and write. You cannot, handwriting. Slowly, eventually, he influenced few people in the Kerala Shastra Parishad, right? And then they were convinced. And then it became the whole thing about what is development and whose development is it anyway. And what is the cost benefit analysis of development. So that is very interesting how a simple, alert by a forestry researcher to a zoology professor slowly turned into a discussion and debate, and everybody opposed them first. But then the debate was what kind of development is we require and what is the cost benefit analysis. And eventually, when MGK Menon, became the Minister of Science, and who was again a scientist, if you know, and Indira Gandhi in 1984. So it started in 77, right? So it is 5 years, 7 years campaign. Eventually, Indira Gandhi declared Silent Valley as the national park, and then they created the whole issue of national park, and you cannot have hydroelectric project or anything which affect the national park. That's how it has come. So Shastra Parishad played that role, but actually the real trigger was a simple researcher who alerted this, and it took almost 2 years, for 1.5 years, for Shastra Parishad to take it up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Is there any other question? Any other comments, clarificatory notes? Okay. So yeah. So indeed, John, I was listening very patiently, and thank you more for agreeing and providing us some time. VSCP is just in a very infant stage of its journey. We have just started last year, you know that, and we are trying to create a environment of listening, exchanging knowledge, and practicing patience, as I say, and trying to understand things in a very serious way, so that in the days ahead we can really make a difference in the domain of public policy, in the domain of policy which affects all of us. So we have started working on that, and this idea to impact series is just one of them. So of course, needless to say that your talk was truly a real eye opener, and it shed light on how history always plays a pivotal role in understanding and interpreting the present. Your insights into the incredible role of civil society in shaping public policies were inspiring, with examples when you talk about ranging from fight against Satiraha, the promotion of the Silent Valley, the RTI, and many others which we have learned today, and it's really fascinating. We hardly have thought in this way, hardly have looked at things at this way. So it's very important. I mean, this series, especially this particular evening, is a very important milestone for VACP. Such instance only underscore the power of collective action in driving societal change. So one can't help but but wish our usual curriculum offered more opportunities to delve into such meaningful discussions. I mean, something that Christiana also tried to highlight probably. So after all, knowledge thrives when shared. It ought to it, when it's shared, and it ought to be treated as a public good. I firmly believe that way, that knowledge should be a public good in some form or the other, which is accessible and beneficial to all. So we all have been mentored. Many of people like me and many others like me have been mentored by you from day one, when we are just students at JNU, and finally we are trying to follow your legacy, and whatever way we can contribute to make a difference, we are trying in our own small way, and VACP is just one like that. So I would request you. We were discussing for long, and the audience will be happy to know that we are trying to. VACP is trying to have a proper MOU with Bodhigram John's Institute, situated in Adur, Kerala, which is again a fascinating thing. I'd request all to visit the website, and if possible, if you're in Kerala, do visit Bodhigram. It's worth visiting, even if you're not attending a program there. Even if it's worth visiting that place. So thanks, John. Thanks to all the participants for joining.
Thank you.
See you again sometime
Thank you.
in the
Yeah.
next.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you very much. Yeah.